Welcome to Tenacity with Sonia C., the podcast where entrepreneurs, founders, and ambitious professionals come to learn from those who have walked the path, navigating challenges and achieving success. Whether it's thriving in business, pivoting, scaling for growth, fundraising, or finding work-life balance, dealing with loneliness, adversity, or overcoming personal struggles. Our guests share the insights and strategies that have empowered them to level up. I'm your host, Sonia, and let's get started. My guest today is Aleksandar Svetski, entrepreneur, author, and archaeofuturist. Aleksandar has spent more than 15 years building businesses, succeeding, failing, and rebuilding along the way. He's the founder of Amber, the world's first Bitcoin-only savings app. In this conversation, Aleksandar and I dive into the lessons learned from failure, the regulatory battles he fought while building Amber, and his three-generational theory for Bitcoin adoption. This is a conversation about resilience, philosophy, and what it really takes to build in systems that often work against you. Hi, Alex. How are you? Welcome to the show.
Sonia, thank you for having me.
Yeah, I'm excited to get into this conversation. Let's dig right in. So you've been building businesses for more than 15 years, some successful, some not. Can you take us back to your first venture and what you learned about resilience from those early attempts?
Absolutely. I'm sounding old now, 15 years. Holy crap. So my first quote unquote venture was I lost a bunch of money on the stock market when I turned 20 basically. So it was 2007, right before the GFC really hit. And I thought I was a genius trader. I took all my scholarship money. Initially I did well. I took $5,000 and I turned it into 60, and I thought I was a genius. I put my spreadsheets together. I was like, okay, watch out, Warren Buffett. I'm going to be a billionaire. And then I lost everything and I ended up levering up. I got margin loans, and then I basically started my 20s $200,000 in debt. So the first venture, the first thing I had to do to get out of debt was I knocked on doors. I was a door-to-door salesperson, and I did very well. Not that I knew what the hell I was selling. I was selling pay television. I didn't even have a TV. I was living on someone's lounge room floor. But I got good at communicating. And very quickly, I realized that I could build my own sales company off the back of that. So I branched out and I built my first sales company. So that was my first bit of success. And I guess the resilience tenacity piece was baked into my persona early on, because when you're doing door-to-door sales, basically 95% of people are telling you to piss off, go away, get bent, whatever. Like I got chased down the road with an axe, with a pole, like all sorts of crazy shit. So I would
come
always
on, an
go in.
axe.
Yeah, seriously. Yeah, like I would go into, because when you're doing door-to-door sales, you're usually selling like either it's trinkets, or at this time I was selling pay television. And there's a thing about door-to-door sales is if you go to the lower socioeconomic areas, they are more inclined to buy. But they're also very dangerous areas generally, particularly in Australia. So it would take someone with some guts to go down there. So they would usually it took two things. It took someone who was good at sales and also had guts. And in the office, you sort of had like people that were good at sales, but they were too like, sort of correct, and they wouldn't want to go in those areas. And then also when it was girls doing door-to-door sales, they were very good, but the girls would never get sent in those areas. So then it was like up to idiots like me who would be like, yeah, I'll go. And oh man, I was in some dodgy places. But yeah, I've seen it all during that period. It was nuts.
Okay, so you failed at the stock market at first, then you
Hmm.
started another company, and you were in debt. But you found Bitcoin in 2015. How
Yeah,
did
so it was
how
many
did
years
that
later.
moment of loss push you towards entrepreneurship and eventually to Bitcoin? What was that moment that you said, I'm going to get into this Bitcoin business?
Okay, so I mean, Bitcoin came almost a decade later. So after I lost everything on the stock market, I did door-to-door sales. I, at the same time, went down the rabbit hole of trying to understand money, economics, Austrian economics in particular, and I became a gold bug. So I was buying gold and silver in 2009, 2010. And for anyone who's familiar with that market, that was sort of pre-money printing stage, or it was around the time when the government started to print a shitload of money for the first sort of significant time in the modern era. And gold rallied. It was $500-600 when I first bought it, and it rallied, 1,000 1,500 bucks, whatever it was. And I made a bunch of money in that phase. And I'd heard about Bitcoin then, but I kind of wrote it off. I was like, yeah, whatever, internet funny money.
Mm-hmm.
I've got my sound money here. I've got gold. So I stuck with that, and that was from an investment standpoint. My life took an
Mm-hmm.
entrepreneurial path though. So I had to pay my debts. I owed the banks $200,000. I couldn't Before I could eat, I had to pay $2,000 a month, and this is 2010 we're talking about. So 2 grand a month back
Mm-hmm.
then was, probably the equivalent of 4 or 5 grand a month now, considering how bad inflation has gotten. So I would literally run door to door with 4 cans of tuna in my pocket, and I would only eat a can of tuna if I got a sale. So that was like I was motivated because I had to. So I became a good salesperson, built that up, and then from there I sort of branched off into other businesses and I kept busy. And it wasn't until 2015 that I encountered Bitcoin again, and it was because a startup that I'd built had failed. I was trying to build like a kind of like Tinder for jobs. So it was a recruitment application where we used personality profiling and skills to create like a
Mm-hmm.
match between candidates and employers. So we did away with resumes and job ads, and it was more like you create a profile, you identify who you are, personality, all this sort of stuff, and then the employer did the same on the other side, and our algo would match you. And if they both swipe
Mm-hmm.
right, we connected them. So it was a cool idea, but it was a marketplace. Marketplaces require lots of money. So
Yeah.
we were underfunded. So when that sort of failed, I was looking for, all right, what am I going to do next? And then a friend of mine had mentioned Bitcoin. I was like, Bitcoin, is that thing still around? And then as I started digging, I went down the rabbit hole, and the ingredients from my life previously, so being entrepreneurial, going down the Austrian economics gold rabbit hole, understanding what money is, it understanding Bitcoin came very quick to me. And I
Mm-hmm.
went down also the shitcoin path. So we'll discuss this in, maybe in your subsequent questions. But I did a lot of shitcoining, but then I ultimately came back to Bitcoin and realized, wait a minute, the problem that is being solved here is the fact that institutions can print money. That is the big issue. And
Mm.
Bitcoin solves that, rebalances the economic system, and has extraordinary knock-on consequences for the world that are positive. So I basically became a Bitcoin maximalist, and I built Australia's first Bitcoin, actually the world's first Bitcoin only savings app. And
Yep.
and yeah, the rest is history.
And you did that in 2017, the world's first Bitcoin
Yes, yeah,
only
exactly.
savings app, right?
Yeah.
What
Everyone was
problem were
laughing at
you?
me. They're like, "What about where's Ethereum? Where's this?" Was I was like, "No, no, no.
Yeah.
Bitcoin. That's it."
Well, I'm interested in why you went down that path. Like what problem were you trying to solve and what was the most challenging part of getting people to adopt to it?
Yeah, so Bitcoin solves a particular problem, and that problem is that money is broken. So people treated Bitcoin like an investment. And my pitch was Bitcoin's not an investment. Bitcoin is a savings instrument. You don't invest in
Mm,
Bitcoin because like the things you invest in, you do so that you can make more money.
right.
Bitcoin is money. So Bitcoin is an exit. So you're not buying Bitcoin so that you can sell it later and make more dollars. That's stupidity. Like what you want to do is you want to transform everything you have into Bitcoin. So Bitcoin is your base rate. That is the hurdle
Mm,
rate of everything else. So the way I positioned the app, the problem that I was solving was, look, forget about trading, forget about timing the market, forget about any of that. Link your bank account, set a savings plan, $20 a week, $50 a month, whatever you want, and then this thing will automatically purchase Bitcoin for you on a regular basis. And we
mm,
helped tens of thousands of people for the last, what now? It's been around almost 10 years now. Um, to just slowly acquire Bitcoin because that's the goal. Do you have more Bitcoin today than you had yesterday? That's the only measure that matters, not the price of Bitcoin, because that's going to go up,
yeah.
down, around in circles. It doesn't matter. What matters is do you have more Bitcoin than you had yesterday because there's a finite supply. So you want to own as much as you can.
Mm,
And that was specifically the problem that we're solving. So when I was doing that back then, that sort of narrative didn't really exist. If, for those who remember, back then it was all about trading and shitcoins and this and that and all this
yeah.
noise, ICOs and all this sort of stuff. So I had to educate people on two things. One, I had to educate them on what is Bitcoin, why it's different. And then two, educate them on why saving Bitcoin is the appropriate strategy, not trying to trade it or invest it or any of that sort of stuff. So it was a mission. It was like, but we tr fundamentally transformed the entire global marketplace because now there is an app like Amber. That was the name of the app that we built. There is an app like Amber in almost every country around the world. We
Yeah.
got copied by everybody. There's
Yeah.
four or five in America. There's a bunch in Europe, Asia, everywhere, everywhere. They're all doing it. They're Bitcoin only and they're savings apps.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you were sort of like disrupting a space that had never had anything built like that. But I want to talk about that a little bit because I think it's important for founders to get into this type of thing. You faced intense regulatory pressure when you were building Amber, especially around surveillance requirements. How did those battles shape your journey as a founder, and what lessons do you think other entrepreneurs can take from that experience?
Yeah, so that was actually part of the reason why I left Amber in the end was I ended up unfortunately the regulators and all this sort of stuff who in my opinion add no value to civilization or society. They are basically like leeches. They don't build anything, they don't construct anything, they just want to surveil everything and they want to be
Mm-hmm.
micromanagers over people's lives. When you're building a business, you've got those kind of people that don't actually do anything, they just micromanage everyone. You want to
Yeah.
cut them out of your business. So in the same
Yeah.
way in society you have these like leeches, these micromanagers that don't do anything, they just like surveil people. So Bitcoin, a big part of why Bitcoin was created was to obsolete those people, right? So money is a instrument to exchange value, and people should be allowed to do that without the permission of a third party, right? That's like as soon as you have permission of a third party, you don't have money, you have a broken money.
Mm.
So because the regulators, because the authorities, because these institutions can't control Bitcoin directly, what they do is they target the on-ramps. They target the companies that help you go from fiat to Bitcoin. So we were one
Mm.
of those. Every exchange, everything like that is one of those. We are considered money changer
Yeah.
institutions. So what ended up happening over time, the regulation got more and more and more. The requests became harder and harder, and I basically found myself running not a technology startup anymore. I was running a compliance company. I was running a bank.
Yeah.
I was like, fuck
Yeah.
this. I didn't get into this business to run a compliance company. Like, I hated that so much. Like, I'm a product guy. I love building product. I love designing
Mm.
things. I love creating things. I love solving problems. And here I was spending maybe 40% of my time each week on compliance and paperwork and documentation and application. I was like, what am I doing? So yeah, I wrapped up my time there. Another CEO took over and I was already out of the country as well. And then obviously Australia lost its mind with the lockdowns and everything. So I was like, I'm done. I'm
You're
out of here.
out.
And
But that's
yeah, went
Yeah, but
elsewhere.
that's a good example to talk about, like getting into a space that you're passionate about, you really love, and then all of a sudden there's this compliance, regulatory stuff that comes in that you're never prepared for. And I think that's part of like building a product that's in a disruptive space because you don't know what's coming up as an entrepreneur or as a CEO, and you don't know what kind of things you're going to have to handle going down that path, right? And it just so happens that you hit a block that you just didn't like and you didn't want to do it anymore because of that, right?
That was a big part of it. Yeah, absolutely. And
Yeah.
I mean, there was other parts as well because I was like, I met my wife in Latin America and we decided to get married and settle down on this side of the world. So the time zones were a pain in the ass, all this sort of stuff. And I think it's really important when you're building anything, it's sometimes we get so sucked into, oh, I've got to do this, I've got to build it, and you kind of like tie your identity to it. And
Mm,
I took a step back and I was like, okay, why am I doing this? When I first started the business, I was on this like crusade to bring Bitcoin to people and to change their lives and all this sort of thing. And I was like, I felt like I'd done a lot of that already. I became quite well known for my writing, so I wrote and published a book called The Uncommunist Manifesto, and that like hit the bestsellers list. We got everything from Alex Jones to Jordan Peterson, all sorts of shows on that thing, and I was like, okay, maybe I want to do something else that kind of
mm,
feeds my soul and is sort of like a different chapter for life. So I think for entrepreneurs that's really important because we can get so caught up in the thing that we think is our mission, but it's no longer
mm.
our mission. There's a time to persevere and there's a time to quit. And that's different for everyone. Like I can't
Yeah.
sit here and tell someone that this is the time and that's the time. You have to figure that out yourself. But that was the big realization for me. It was like, look, this is no longer for me. And there's a million and one other opportunities or things that I can do in my life that I should go and spend the finite time I have on. And that was the decision I made.
Yeah. And I think that's great because you didn't keep like beating a dead horse. You just said like no longer finding joy in this. I'm gonna go do something else. Because I think when you stick to something that you're no longer enjoying, that product's not gonna do well. You're gonna be miserable. So it's good to walk away sometimes when it's not serving you any longer.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, so you've been very open about both success and failures. And on the show, one of my favorite things to talk about is failures. I try to focus on those and not so much success because everyone loves to talk about success. So can you share a failure throughout your journey? And it can be any business because you've had many, that really tested your tenacity and how it shaped the way you approach building businesses today.
There was a chapter of my life where I was in hospitality, and
Mm-hmm.
I'll never ever do hospitality again. Like, damn, that's the hardest business with the lowest return. Honestly, man, it's tough. And I wanted to go for the big leagues straight away. So we were kind of launching these like health food slash frozen yogurt little shops. And
Mm-hmm.
I immediately, um, instead of building out a series of flagship stores first and really getting the systems and processes down, I immediately franchised it. Because
Oh,
we launched one and people loved it straight away. So I was like, oh, this is a franchise. So I franchised it straight away. And I sold 10 franchises in like 6 months. It was insane. We were one
okay.
of the fastest growing franchises in Australian history. It was mental. And I had no idea what to do with franchising, like how it worked, how it functioned, any of that sort of stuff. And I basically had to like, that whole saying, it's like building a startup is like flying a plane or, jumping off a cliff and building the plane on the way down, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
that's literally what I was doing. And man, it was the amount of effort that went into that, the amount of work, the amount of like, I was on a flight every 2 or 3 days to a different shop, different builder, different this supplier, all this sort of stuff. And like for me, the lesson was I tried to do way too much too early.
Mm,
And what I didn't have was systems, processes, and people around me that could handle that. So I carried a lot of that.
mm-hmm.
It was you know, I literally bit off more than I can chew. There's
Yeah.
no other sort of way to put it. And I have that tendency throughout my life. Even with Atlantis that I'm building now, like we bit off more than we could chew in the beginning. Had this very clear vision that sort of grew and grew and grew as we got more feedback from the market, and we kind of like ended up going for this grandiose super app. And now I'm sort of in the process of culling that down to the one of the key elements, one of the key parts of the product that seem to be getting the most traction.
Mm-hmm.
So it almost was like a diamond. Like we went out and now we're coming back in. And I don't know if that's just my personal nature, or if that's the nature of all things. But
Mm.
yeah, the big lesson for me is trying really hard, and it's a lesson that I'm consistently learning, trying really hard to do less in the beginning and do it really, really well
Well,
before going on and doing more. Because yeah, I just have this tendency, and I think a lot of entrepreneurs have this tendency. It's like you
yeah.
see the whole vision, you see what you want to do, you're trying to get everything done because you feel like life is too short, there's not enough time, all this sort of shit, and you end up doing too much and you do a bunch of it mediocre. So
Yeah.
that's the lesson. It's an ongoing lesson for me. I have to be honest.
And you know what? It's so funny you're saying that because this is a common conversation that I have, especially like around founders who are building MVPs and they end up building the entire product instead
Yeah,
of
yeah,
building an
yeah.
MVP. And then they take it to market and now they have to scale it back versus if they had just stuck to building that minimal viable product, took it to market, learned from their customers, then they could go back and build on top of that MVP versus having to strip it all down and build it again. And we've all made that mistakes. I've done that too. So it is a common thing with particularly entrepreneurs, I think, for sure.
It is, but it's also very tricky because sometimes you do build an MVP and then the market gives you feedback and they want something else. So then you listen to them and you build something else. And then sort of you end up with like a Frankenstein. And then all of a sudden you're like, wait a minute, we listened to all these people and they all wanted different things. And
Mm.
then we sort of built this kind of like Rube Goldberg machine, which we now have to then strip back. So it's quite difficult. The MVP approach in theory sounds fine, but in practice it's much harder to implement because sometimes the market can lead you astray. Like you got the sort of
Yeah.
the Steve Jobs paradigm, which is, don't ask customers what they want because they don't know what the fuck they want. So
Yeah.
build it and then they'll realize what they want. So there's definitely a tension between those two approaches. And I don't know what the
I
right answer is. Like,
I agree with you to a certain degree, but I also think that there are ways to go about it differently to make it more successful. So, for
hmm
example, entrepreneurs, I always call them inventors. They're people that are
hmm hmm
passionate about the products that they're building and not necessarily about how to run a business. That's problem number one. I think number two is if you're building a minimal viable product, you're not going to depend on customer feedback to build your product, but it really has to be about what problem are you solving
hmm hmm
and
hmm
who is the biggest case study for you to solve that problem too. So let's talk about your book for a little bit. It's called The Three Generations Theory of Bitcoin Adoption, correct?
That one, that's an article. The book
That's an
is The Shadow
article.
of
Okay.
Bitcoin and Uncommunist Manifesto. But all good, we can hit the article if you want.
Yeah, I do. Can you walk us through what that looks like and what founders today should be preparing for if they're building for the long horizon?
Yeah, absolutely. So my thesis in that essay, and that essay actually went viral. So my thesis there was that a lot of people try and project technological adoption curves on Bitcoin because it's somewhat a technology. But my argument in there is Bitcoin is a techno socioeconomic phenomenon. So it is a piece of technology, but it's also social and economic. And
Mm,
the fact that it's social and the fact that it's economic mean that it moves slower. The adoption curve will not look like an iPhone or AI or something like that. It's not going to be quick because
yeah.
it takes time for the culture, the society, and the economic substrate to change, to shift. So, a way to think about it is if if you bought an iPhone and it turned out that smartphones or iPhones were not going to be a thing, the worst case scenario is you lost $1,000. It's not the
Mm,
end of the world, right?
yeah.
But if you took your money, your wealth, and you moved it onto Bitcoin, and Bitcoin turned out to fail, you lose everything, right?
Yeah.
So if you look at it through that lens, you realize that society is not going to just move on to Bitcoin in a space of 10 years or 20 years. People are like, oh, Bitcoin's been around for 20 years and, it hasn't gone anywhere. It's like, well, it actually went from zero to, 2 trillion, 3 trillion. But this is only the beginning. What people don't realize
Mm,
is that there are there are young kids now that are reaching 20 years old that were sorry, well, not 20 years old. They'd be reaching 16 years old, 17 years old, that were born after Bitcoin started.
yeah.
They don't even know of a world before Bitcoin. So when they come of age, when they're 25, when they're building businesses, they're going to perceive Bitcoin very differently. Like our generation, we started with 1 foot before Bitcoin, 1 foot in Bitcoin. So we're in the first generation. So this is where the three generations come in. We're the first generation of Bitcoin, the first 20 years, which is the speculatory era. We are measuring Bitcoin against dollars, and everything is about exchanges, savings companies, wallets, mining, all this sort of stuff. It's like the
Mm-hmm.
process of moving into Bitcoin. The next generation of Bitcoin will be about integrating it as payments in every single app, right?
Mm,
So the idea that we're going to have to sit there and use Stripe and plug in APIs and all this kind of nonsense and like send money between borders with different currencies and exchange rates and all this crap, that starts to disappear in the next era of Bitcoin. So if we want to think about it, sort of 2010 to 2030 is the speculatory era. So we've probably got another 5 years of that. Then
mm,
2030 to 2050 is the infrastructure era, is that every single app in the world starts to have payments baked into it. So it could
Mm.
be the future of like social applications. So instead of liking stuff, you could zap someone, you could send them a Satoshi, right? Which is a fraction of a Bitcoin. You could literally, instead of just having normal Google reviews, you could have reviews where the best reviews get tipped, right? And then the best reviews sort of go up, the ones with the most tips. You could pay directly to merchants. So one thing when I
Mm.
first moved to Brazil, it was a nightmare. Like the equivalent to DoorDash down here is called Rappi, and you can't use international cards. So you have to get a local card. It's impossible as a tourist or anything like that to get a local card. So the people who are most likely to use like the DoorDash facilities, which are tourists and travelers, can't use it because you can't pay for anything. Like it used to drive me
Yeah.
absolutely mental. So with Bitcoin, that doesn't exist. You just like, it
Mm.
doesn't matter. There's no borders, there's no country, there's no exchange rate, there's none of that sort of stuff. So you will start to see in the next era of Bitcoin sort of adoption, the 2030 to
Mm-hmm.
2050, every single application will have payments baked into it. And then 2050 to 2070, sort of Bitcoin starts to become forgotten. It's kind of like the internet. Every business
Mm.
starts to become a Bitcoin business. Like today, every single business is a internet business somewhat, right? Everything
Yeah.
is somehow connected to the internet. So that's sort of how I see these three generations. And if people start to think long term like that, they can start to plan for that. It's like, okay, well,
Mm.
if we're making the bet that in the first 20 years, like we're only 15 years into Bitcoin and there's already probably 100, 200 million Bitcoin holders, in the next 5, 10, 15 years, there's probably going to be closer to a billion. So that means you've got a marketplace of a billion people holding that currency. So think of it almost as a country. So it's like the US has 300 million people holding US dollars. Like soon, Bitcoin will be a billion people holding something. That's a
Mm.
massive commerce unlock. So you want to think about building businesses in the future where it's baked in, which is precisely what we're doing with my latest companies. We're building now a travel and events app where the payments are literally baked into it. So you can, inside
Mm.
the feed, inside anything, just literally purchase a ticket for an event without worrying about Stripe or credit card or any of that sort of shit. And it literally, the payment goes directly to the host. There's
Mm.
no middleman, there's no nothing. And it's all,
Ah.
your wallet is directly inside the app. And it
Right.
goes from your wallet to their wallet. No, like it's the most frictionless experience on the planet. And something like that
So
doesn't exist.
so it's kind of like you rent a Airbnb, but instead of paying Airbnb, you just paid the host directly,
Correct. Correct.
right? Okay,
Yeah.
cool.
Yeah. Could be the
Well,
same
I
with, imagine Uber, Airbnb, every single
yeah,
service. Yeah. Think of that
yeah.
that way. Yeah.
But I found something really interesting about you because you've been critical of the current AI industry, even calling parts of it a Ponzi scheme. What's your advice for founders today who are considering building in AI space, and why do you have that perception of it?
Yeah, I'll start with the advice. My advice is to use it as a tool, just like any other tool. So it's like I
Yeah,
kind of put it in the realm of using JavaScript in your language,
right.
in the tech stack. So this idea, like where I get pissed off is when people are like, oh yeah, AI is gonna take over the world and
No, it's
it's
not.
gonna become sentient and blah 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 all that bullshit. Like no, that stuff is ridiculous. Like general intelligence is far more complex than computational intelligence, and we just can't model it. It's infinite. So that's sort of like the first piece of garbage. The reason why I've called it a Ponzi scheme is that there's so much noise in the VC space around AI, and if you really look at what's happening, is none of the small scale or even mid scale, even a bunch of the large scale ones, none of them actually have a business.
Mm,
All of them raise a bunch of money and then pour the majority of that money into two things. One is compute, and the other is kind of like the picks and shovels. So, like if they're doing reinforcement learning or training or something like that that's sophisticated. So, basically, the only companies making money are Nvidia, Google, Amazon, Microsoft for selling GPUs or compute. And then there's companies like Scale AI and stuff like that that are selling services so that people can do the training, fine tuning, and all this sort of stuff.
mm-hmm,
Nobody else is making money because the marginal like I mean, there's many reasons, but one of the big ones is that unlike a normal website or a normal digital product, the marginal cost of adding a new user or serving a new user on a traditional digital product is zero. It doesn't cost you any more if you've got an app, for example, to get a new sign up. But with an AI service, you actually have inference cost for each new person that joins.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So you have a real marginal cost for every single person. So the mathematics isn't the same as the traditional digital product. So there's this sort of false economics that's going on at the moment where there's billions of dollars being invested in AI startups and all this sort of stuff. But all of the money from the startups is going right back up to Nvidia, Google, Microsoft, and Google, and Amazon. And what's funny, if you really trace where the money comes from, I saw this great chart, and I don't have it on me at the moment, but it was showing that the majority of the money going into the large VCs actually come from Google, Nvidia, Microsoft, and all that sort of stuff. So they're the LPs,
Mm.
get the money into the VCs. The VCs end up putting the money into the startups, and then the money washes back up to the compute providers. So it's kind of like almost like a money laundering Ponzi scheme. It's like no one's actually building anything of value. It's just rinsing
Yeah.
through this industry. Um, so that's sort of my critique. But what I'll say is, as I said earlier, it's a tool. And if you're building a startup, my advice to anyone is avoid building an AI startup. Just build a great product that provides an awesome solution to a shitty problem and put use AI to sort of make the solution as good and as
Mm.
intuitive and as useful as possible. Like
Yeah.
I always use Uber as an example. Uber is the best example of using AI because they use it to match you with the appropriate driver at the best price in the appropriate time. Like, Uber's got a balance. Like, if they give you a driver too quickly, you get pissed off because you're like, oh, I wasn't ready. If it takes too long, you get pissed off because you have to wait too long. So they have to they basically use all of this algorithmic intelligence under the hood to get you the
Mm.
right driver at the right time in the right place and all this sort of stuff. And that is a great use of AI. You don't need to
Yeah.
sit there and chat to Uber and be like, "Oh, my Uber LLM." You don't need
Yeah.
that shit. So that's kind of the way to think about it is use it as an enabler and as a tool. AI is not going to be a space where you have lots of competitors. There's going to be a
Mm-hmm.
couple of big winners. That's it. So you got
Yeah.
ChatGPT in the LLM space, and they've just basically shit all over Google and everyone else, right? So it's like chat, you got one main winner there, and then in the sort of web development or like programmer replacement
Software
space,
programming.
software
Yeah.
exactly. You've got like Lovable and Cursor, right?
Yeah.
And that's it. So it's like it's a place for a couple big winners, but all of the long tail for me is like complete waste. No one's gonna go
Yeah.
there. Like you look at there was one that Microsoft invested in called Pi. They poured 1.2 billion into that, thinking that it was gonna be the ChatGPT killer.
Yeah.
Gone. Like and even Google can't. Like Google's got all of the resources in the world, and nobody uses Gemini. Nobody.
You've published a couple of books, but I want you to tell me a little bit about your manifesto one. What made you want to get to write that particular topic?
So when I was younger, I was never really political, and then when I got
Mm.
into Bitcoin, I sort of became quasi political because
You
Bitcoin
had no
is,
choice.
it's well, yeah, kind of exactly, and Bitcoin's also like it's like as I said before, it's a socio-political economic beast.
Yeah.
And you sort of start to realize all the things that are wrong in the world and all this kind of stuff. So myself and my co-author Mark Moss, we wrote the book in 20 end of 2021, early 2022, whatever it was. And that was kind of like peak woke, if you remember, like peak
Mm. Yes.
masks and lockdowns and madness and all this kind of stuff. And I was like, what
Craziness.
is going on with the world? So I was like, okay, screw this. Like, we need to say something about this.
Mm.
And yeah, the ideas sort of came as a result of a conversation that Mark and I had 6 months prior. We were both in El Salvador right before Bukele announced the Bitcoin law over there. And he asked me a
Mm.
question during lunch. He's like, "Have you read the Communist Manifesto?" I was like, why the hell would I do that? He's like, it's really bad. I'm like, I'm sure it is, man. I was like, I'm sure to like give you brain damage while you're reading it. And he's like, somebody should write a book to sort of rebut that. Like, what's the
Mm.
antidote to this book? And yeah, that was in June, July 2021. And then yeah, 6 months later, I had some downtime. It was actually just as I left Amber, my prior company, and I called Mark up and I was like, hey man, what are you doing over the next couple of weeks? He's like, just relaxing. And I said, you want to write that book? And yeah, we went to Austin. We locked ourselves in an Airbnb for a week, and we just like wrote the bulk of it. And yeah, it was a killer book. It was like one of the first sort of like books to go wide.
Mm,
That was a middle finger to the whole like leftist agenda and the whole losing our minds around, creeping socialism and communism that's happening all around the world today.
yeah. Well, we're coming up on time, but before we wrap up, I just want to ask you one last question. If you could give one piece of advice to a founder or an entrepreneur struggling right now, whether it's market fit, regulation, or just keeping their head above water, what would you tell them?
Let's say something like this, basically related to what I said earlier, is like, do you really want to do this? And I know that this is probably not the best, like the advice some people want to hear, but like I'm not suggesting you quit. Like I think what I'm actually suggesting is for you to sort of look inside and say, is this actually really what you want to do? And
Yeah.
if it is, then double down. There's no excuses. Like the only way through hell is to keep going.
Mm,
But if you really search deep down in your soul and you come to the realization that, hey, this is actually not what you want to do, then cut your losses, move on, get on to the next
mm,
thing because life doesn't wait around. Like the older I get, man, honestly, the more I realize that life remains undefeated. When you're young, you think you're going to defeat it. You're never going to age. You're never going to get old. Like blah blah blah. You're going to have it all. Bullshit. Life defeats every single one of us, and you want to spend as much of the finite time that you have doing the things that you're good at, that you enjoy the most, and that give you the
hmm
most sort of like fire for life. So yeah,
mm.
that's the thing I would pose.
I love it. Well, Alex, thank you so much for joining me today, walking me through your journey in this crazy world and all of the stuff that you're doing in the startups, and sharing your knowledge with our audience. I really appreciate your time.
I appreciate you, Sonia. Thank you.
Thank you. I want to thank Alexander for joining me today and sharing not just his entrepreneurial journey, but also his vision for the future of Bitcoin, AI, and decentralizing networks. What stood out to me is how he's taken failures, regulatory pressures, and challenges and turned them into fuel for building something bigger. His perspective is a reminder that resilience isn't just about surviving setbacks, it's about using them to redefine what's possible. And that's a wrap. To our listeners, thank you for joining me on this journey of learning, growth, and inspiration. Don't forget to subscribe to this podcast on your favorite platform and connect with our community on social media. I'd love to hear your feedback, so leave a review and let me know what topics you'd want to explore in future episodes. Remember, the future belongs to those who embrace challenges, adapt with tenacity, and keep pushing forward. Keep growing, keep pivoting, and most importantly, stay tenacious in your pursuits. Thank you for tuning in, and I look forward to bringing you more insightful conversations in our upcoming episodes. This is Sonia signing off, but as always, keep chasing your dreams with tenacity.